There's a moment every Scorpio knows. It's not when someone screams. It's not when everything falls apart. It's that silent, almost imperceptible instant when something inside you stirs. A weight too light to be called a premonition, too heavy to be ignored. As if the universe had whispered something and you weren't sure if you heard it or made it up. But you stopped, because you always stop. This has a name. It's just that nobody told you what it is. There's a widespread idea that God speaks to everyone in the same way, clearly, with obvious signs, with signs in the sky or grandly orchestrated coincidences. And maybe that's how it works for some signs, but Scorpio isn't like that. It never has been. And if you've spent years waiting for a clear voice, for an unequivocal vision, for absolute certainty that never came, you need to hear what I'm about to tell you. God doesn't speak to Scorpio through the edges. He speaks through the center, through the place that hurts, through the silence that doesn't pass, through the wound that has healed but still throbs when the weather changes. You don't receive divine messages at the top of the mountain. You receive them at rock bottom. And this is not punishment. This is architecture. Scorpio was built in a way that most people can't handle, with the ability to descend, to go to inner places where most instinctively retreat. Most people, when they feel too much, find a way out. They distract themselves, fall asleep, occupy their time. Not you. You feel, you process, you carry. And in the midst of all that, unceremoniously, without warning, something breaks through. A strange clarity, a calmness that shouldn't belong there, a certainty about something you hadn't even asked yet. This isn't random intuition, it's direct communication. And you've spent your whole life receiving this communication without having the vocabulary to describe what it was. There's a pattern that Scorpios carry that almost no one on the outside can see. It's not the pattern of intensity, which everyone already knows. It's not the pattern of silence or secrecy. It's a more subtle pattern, which happens before all of that. The pattern of active waiting. Scorpio doesn't act on impulse. Scorpio feels, absorbs, processes in silence, and only acts when something internal gives a signal. This signal isn't rational. It isn't calculated. It isn't a cold strategy, however much it may seem so from the outside. It's a response to something you received before understanding what it was. And here comes the question that nobody asks: where does this signal come from? Because you've probably noticed at some point in your life that this sign is right more often than wrong, that when you ignore it, something goes wrong, that when you follow it, even without explanation, things fall into place in a way that doesn't seem accidental, that there's an intelligence behind it that's greater than your own mind. So what is this? What is this invisible thread that pulls Scorpio in certain directions, that closes certain doors before you even knock on them, that puts certain people in your path just when you are about to give up on what they represent? It's not luck. It's not pure instinct, it's not even psychology, no matter how sophisticated the analysis, it's just talk. It's a conversation that doesn't use words, that doesn't use obvious signs, that happens at the deepest frequency that exists. And Scorpio, by design, has always been tuned to that frequency. But being tuned in doesn't mean you actually know how to listen. Receiving is not the same as understanding. And here begins what no one has ever honestly told you, the real mechanics of how this works within you. You are feeling this tension right now between receiving and understanding, between knowing that something is being communicated and not being clear about what it is, between inner certainty and the doubt that follows. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. It's not a book that tells you what to do. It's a book that teaches you to listen to what is already being said, especially for Scorpios who receive more than they imagine but rarely have the tools to decode what comes their way. This book discusses how spirituality manifests differently in each sign, how divine language has dialects, and the dialect of Scorpio is the most silent, the most profound, and the most transformative of all. Understanding this dialect is not a matter of blind faith, it's a matter of cultivated attention, and that's exactly what this material teaches. You are in that moment where the discomfort is real, where the question is active. This is the right moment, not later, not when you have more time, not when life is calmer. Now, because it is precisely when the question is alive that the answer can come. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment when you followed an inner conviction without being able to explain why? And it worked out. What was that like for you? The language of God with Scorpio begins where comfort ends. This is not a metaphor, it is spiritual anatomy. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, the planet of transformation, of symbolic death, of descent into the underworld. And there's a very specific reason for that. The ancients who created astrology didn't choose Pluto by chance. They observed something in those born under this sign, a unique ability to survive what destroys others, not to avoid it, to overcome it. And going through is different from resisting. Resisting is muscular strength. Going through is more like permeability, letting the pain, the loss, the rupture pass through your interior without completely fragmenting you. Only those who have truly gone down know what that means. But what few realize is that this descent has a function beyond survival. It is during the descent that Scorpio receives. Think about how an underground river works. It doesn't exist on the surface. You don't see it. But it's down there, moving in slow motion, nourished by the deepest layers of the earth, carrying minerals that the surface has never known. Scorpio is like that. The richest layers arrive when everything above is dark. In moments of real crisis, not the performative crisis, not the social drama, but that true crisis where you are alone with yourself in the silence of the early morning, it is in those moments that something within you opens up. A perception that was not available before. A clarity about who you are, about what matters, about what needs to change. You've called it an insight. You've called it a turning point. You've called it, that's when I understood. But you've never called it by its most accurate name, revelation, because that's what it is. A revelation that arrived not despite the crisis, but through it. And it wasn't by chance that it was delivered. It was something that knows you better than you know yourself. Now comes the disturbing part, and I need you to handle this carefully because it sounds paradoxical but is profoundly true. Scorpios often believe their crises are failures, that every time the world crumbles around them, it's because something went wrong. That if they were wiser, more careful, more controlled, they would avoid this kind of collapse. And there's a layer of truth there. Scorpios sometimes create their own storms by not wanting to listen before the storm becomes necessary. But most of the crises that Scorpio goes through are not accidents. They are scheduled events, not in the fatalistic and passive sense of the word. In the sense that there was a choice, prior to his conscious memory, that this would be a being capable of withstanding enough pressure for diamonds to form. And diamonds don't grow in comfort. The idea that your crises are scheduled events, not punishments, changes everything. It changes how you look at what has already happened. It changes how you receive what is still to come. And the digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, delves into exactly that. How Scorpio was designed to find purpose precisely where others find paralysis. How to transform each downward cycle into a higher level of clarity and personal power. This is not theoretical knowledge. It's a map to the inner self. The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's an image that stays with me when I think about how Scorpio receives divine guidance. Imagine a stringed instrument in a quiet room. A guitar, a cello, it doesn't matter. When someone plays a note near that instrument, even without physically touching it, the strings that are at the same frequency vibrate sympathetically, without contact, without visible transmission, just through resonance. Scorpio functions in this way in the spiritual realm. It's not that God speaks and Scorpio listens with its ears. It's that when something true is uttered, when there's a right direction, an important person, a path opening up, something inside Scorpio vibrates. It resonates. It responds before the conscious mind processes anything. Have you ever felt it as a no in your body before you had reason to say no? Have you ever felt it as a strange attraction to something you didn't yet understand? Have you ever felt that specific peace that comes after a difficult decision, not the peace of relief, but the peace of getting it right? These aren't random sensations, they are responses to real communication. And the question that inevitably arises now is, if this is true, if Scorpio really operates on this frequency of direct communication with something greater, why do you so often doubt? Why do you so often ignore exactly what is being said most clearly? The answer has to do with a misidentification that almost every Scorpio makes. At some point in your life, you learn to trust analysis more than perception, because analysis is explainable. You can show someone the reasoning that led you to a conclusion. Perception cannot. It appears without justification, without demonstrable logic, and in a world that values what can be proven, that seems unreliable. So you started filtering, double-checking, waiting for external confirmation of what you already knew internally. And in that waiting, some of the most important messages slipped away. Not because you've lost them forever, but because there's a deadline. Not the dramatic, anxious deadline that pop culture sells, a more subtle deadline. Spiritual messages arrive with a window of availability, and when you're ready, the window reopens, but it usually costs you more than it would have if you had listened the first time. You know this cost. You've paid it before. You've said, "I knew it," after failing to act when you knew. But there's something deeper going on here, and that's what will change how you understand the language God uses specifically with you. Scorpio doesn't receive messages to be informed, it receives messages to be transformed. That's the fundamental difference. A sign that reaches Scorpio isn't saying, "Do X because X is the right choice." It's saying, "Do X because in the process of doing X, you will become who you need to be." The message isn't about destiny, it's about the person you will be when you get there. And this explains something that many Scorpios have never been able to understand, why sometimes the sign leads you to something that seems wrong, that seems difficult, that seems like it will hurt, and it does hurt. But in the end, when you look back, you realize that that period was the most formative of your life, that what you became there is exactly what you needed to become. You were warned. You just didn't have the vocabulary to understand the warning. This understanding that Scorpio's signs are invitations to transformation, not just instructions for action, is at the core of something that the book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, develops with a depth rarely found. It doesn't just talk about what Scorpio is, it talks about what Scorpio is being invited to become, and how to recognize the divine calls that arrive disguised as obstacles, losses, and forced restarts. If you've ever experienced something that destroyed one version of yourself and created a better one, this book will name what happened. The link is in the first pinned comment. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a practice that the most self-aware Scorpios develop, sometimes without realizing they're developing it, sometimes deliberately. I call it slow-motion listening. It's not formal meditation. It's not prayer in the conventional sense. It's a quality of mindfulness that Scorpio accesses when it stops trying to understand and simply begins to be. You've done it before. Probably at times you didn't choose, in the middle of a sleepless night, on a solitary walk, in an awkward silence you decided not to fill. Suddenly, without you having done anything to provoke it, something settles. A certainty, a direction, an answer to a question you weren't even consciously asking. This is not a mental coincidence. It's what happens when the internal noise finally gives way to enough space for the communication that has been arriving all along to finally be received. The problem is that Scorpios tend to live in a constant state of processing. The mind is always analyzing, always tracking patterns, always anticipating. And in this internal noise, however sophisticated it may be, the fine signal gets lost. The moments when you receive with the most clarity are precisely the moments when you are not trying to receive anything, when you have stopped forcing it, when you have accepted that you don't know, when the tension of wanting to control the outcome has subsided, even if only briefly. This is what spiritual traditions call surrender, not passivity, not giving up. An active openness, the decision to be still enough so that what needs to come can come. And the most beautiful paradox of all is that Scorpio, the sign of control, of power, of depth, the sign that most resists vulnerability, is precisely the sign that was most designed to practice this openness. As if the greater purpose were exactly this: to learn that real power is not in control, it is in receptivity. But there's one last layer, the most delicate one, the one that changes everything when you understand it. God doesn't speak to Scorpios only during times of crisis. He doesn't speak only during sleepless nights. He doesn't speak only when everything falls apart and you finally stop trying to hold on. God speaks to Scorpio through the people Scorpio chooses to love. This is the most unexpected channel and the most powerful. Each person who entered your life with intensity, each one who stayed at the level of the deepest layers, not the surface, didn't arrive by chance. They arrived like a mirror, like a question asked in flesh and blood, like an opportunity for transformation that only works because you care enough to be affected. The people Scorpio loves deeply are message bearers, not because they are conscious messengers, but because what they evoke in you, what they reveal, what they challenge, what they heal through their presence or departure, is part of a larger conversation happening about who you are becoming. This means that loss is also a message, that abandonment is also a message, that an unexpected reunion after years is also a message. Not in the simplistic sense of everything happens for a reason, that worn-out phrase that serves more to silence pain than to honor it, in the sense that there is an intelligence operating in Scorpio's bonds that transcends the logic of circumstances. When you begin to see your relationships as part of the divine language, as messages that arrive through the people you choose to love, the way you relate to others changes completely. The book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, offers a unique perspective on how Scorpio finds purpose not only within themselves, but in the web of connections they build. How each deep bond is also an instruction. How Scorpio's loyalty is not just a personality trait, it's a form of spirituality in action. This perspective will transform how you interpret your past experiences. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. So here's what it all means together. You weren't created to receive simple messages. You were created to receive messages that arrive through the most demanding channel that exists: deeply lived experience, pain that wasn't avoided, transformation that wasn't consciously chosen, but was traversed with integrity, loved ones with an intensity that frightens those observing from the outside, but which for you is the only way that makes sense. Each of these things was a channel. Each was a conversation that God had with you, using the only language that Scorpio truly understands, the language of what is real, of what is profound, of what cannot be faked. And if you look at your history, not through the filter of regret, not through the lens of self-criticism, but with the honest question of what did each of these experiences teach me about who I am and what I was created for, you will realize that you were never alone. You were never directionless. You were never irremediably lost. You were being guided. Along the most demanding route, yes. Along a path that few could follow, yes. But guided nonetheless. And this is not consolation, it's recognition. Scorpio wasn't created for a small life. It was created for a life that justifies the depth it carries, a life where intensity has purpose, where the ability to descend serves something greater, where what you survived wasn't wasted, it was preparation. God speaks to Scorpio. He always has, through the pain that transforms, through the crisis that reveals, through the bond that teaches, through the silence that you have finally learned to inhabit without needing to fill it. And the question that remains is not whether you will continue receiving them. You will. The question is whether this time, when the message arrives in the way it usually arrives for you, you will recognize it for what it is. Not an obstacle, not a punishment, not just another difficult cycle in a series of difficult cycles. A conversation, the most important conversation of your life. And you are, right now, in the middle of it.